In January 2019, a vehicle came screaming across a frigid Manitoba prairie. It sped past a Royal Canadian Mounted Police car who clocked it going 145 kilometers per hour. That's around 90 miles an hour for all you Americans out there. When the cops pulled the driver over, he gave a simple explanation for his transgression. He had been listening to Motley Crue's Kickstart My Heart. And really, that's about as good an excuse as you can give for trying to turn a Manitoba prairie into a Fast and Furious movie. In the long history of wild and loud rock music, there are a few songs that capture the adrenaline rush of leaving caution to the wind and putting the pedal to the metal, quite like Kickstart My Heart. From the roaring engine intro to the chugging guitars to the gunshot snare hits, Kickstart My Heart is a pure embodiment of the thrill that comes with danger and rebellion. Hell, the first verse of the song even features a line about outrunning the cops on a custom-built motorbike, with songwriter Nikki Sixx imagining himself outpacing our Manitoba Maverick by a cool 13 miles an hour. But as much as Kickstart My Heart may seem like a reckless ode to living fast and dying young, the song was actually born from a close brush with death, and is a reflection of a critical shift in Motley Crue's career. Let's take a closer look. Ever since its early days, rock and roll music has thrived on the thrill of rebellion. There's something about plugging a guitar into an amp and letting it squeal that triggers a sort of primal response. The heart beats faster, the mind brims with excitement, and the veins pulse with adrenaline. When the genre first sprung to life in the mid-50s, the cultural threshold to reach that thrill was much lower. Electric instruments were new and youth culture was emerging, so simply cranking the volume and donning a leather jacket was enough to scandalize a conservative older generation. But as the rock revolution pushed societal norms, the bar for these sorts of rebellious thrills got raised. Naturally, rock stars responded. They found bigger and crazier ways to rebel. These self-indulgent antics were mythologized by their own songwriting, and by the end of the 70s, as rock was entering its third generation, the archetype of the reckless rock star had become forever enshrined in our cultural imagination. Enter Motley Crue. From their earliest days, Motley Crue understood that the hard rock audience wanted more than just music from their favorite bands. They wanted escape. They wanted to live vicariously through someone who experienced the kind of wanton excess and debauchery that they had always dreamed of. They wanted someone to wear the ostentatious clothes that they felt they could never pull off. Someone to drive the expensive sports cars they could never afford, and someone to piss off all the straight-laced suits that ran society. And Motley Crue were quite happy to oblige. Their breakthrough sophomore album, 1983's Shout at the Devil, was an overt rejection of the swing toward Christian conservatism that defined Ronald Reagan's America. The controversy around the album launched Motley Crue into superstardom, giving them the money and power to indulge like they'd never dreamed of before. And indulge they did. Over the next 4 years, Motley Crue regularly made headlines for their rebellious antics. They lived a very public life of decadence and debauchery, throwing wild drug-fueled parties and getting into run-ins with the law. They angered everyone from their label to parent groups to other bands, and even had a number of close brushes with death. The tales of this era are well documented thanks to Neil Strauss's legendary Crue biography, The Dirt, Confessions of the World's Most Notorious Rock Band. But of all their infamous antics, there's one incident from Motley Crue's wild era that reigns supreme. A story that's been mythologized like few others in rock history, and a story that spelled the end of the band's most decadent era. One wild night in December 1987, Nikki Sixx was partying with a group of rock stars that included members from Guns N' Roses, Rat, and Megadeth at an apartment in Hollywood's Franklin Plaza. By this point, Sixx had been an addict for years, taking just about any substance he could get his hands on. But there was one substance in particular that had its grip on him: heroin. As he wrote in his autobiography, The Heroin Diaries, alcohol, acid, cocaine, they were just affairs. When I met heroin, it was true love. By 1987, Sixx was already well acquainted with the dangers of his chosen drug, having had a number of overdoses. But when he overdosed on that fateful December night, things were different. Sixx's body fell still and his skin turned blue. His friends tried to pull him back from this overdose and bring him to the world of the living, but it was futile. As Sixx lay there, his body began to fail, and he started to have an out-of-body experience. He recalled in the dirt. It felt as if something very gentle was grabbing my head and pulling me upward. Above me, everything was bright white. I looked down and realized that I had left my body. Nikki Sixx, or the filthy tattooed container that had once held him, was laying covered face to toe with a sheet on a gurney being pushed into an ambulance. He was dying. Or maybe more accurately, he was dead. For 2 long minutes, Nikki Sixx lay on a gurney without a heartbeat while the paramedics struggled desperately to revive him. In a last-ditch effort to save the fading rock star, they pumped 2 shots of adrenaline directly into Sixx's heart, kickstarting the system and bringing him back from death's doorstep. Or at least, that's how the legend goes. Whatever actually happened that night, it served as a much-needed wake-up call for Sixx and the rest of Motley Crue. In a 2019 interview with Rolling Stone, Sixx recalled the jolt of being brought back to life. It felt like I'd been fucking hit by a truck. Every single thing hurt. My hair hurt. That reboot is a bitch. Despite all of this, Sixx still had one more piece of defiance in him that evening. When he was lying tubed up in the hospital, police came in to ask him questions about the night. Sixx remembered in Heroin Diaries. There was a cop asking me questions, so I told him to go fuck himself. I ripped out my tubes and staggered in just my leather pants into the parking lot, where 2 teenage girls were sitting crying around a candle. They had heard on the radio that I was dead, and looked kind of surprised to see me. Once the night was behind him, Sixx and the rest of the band began to reflect a little. In January 1988, Sixx entered rehab and began the long road toward recovery. Soon enough, the rest of the band would join Sixx along that road and work towards sobriety themselves. And a few months later, they returned to the studio to record their 5th studio album, Dr. Feelgood. To avoid the distractions and temptations of the rockstar lifestyle, the band left Los Angeles and opted to record the album in the quiet of Vancouver, BC, with the legendary producer Bob Rock. Rock was famous for his work with Metallica and Bon Jovi, among others, and he brought a meticulous approach unseen on Crue's earlier work. Many of the instrumentals and vocal takes were recorded by the bandmates separately to prevent infighting, and the entire affair had an air of professionality that was seldom seen for Motley Crue. It was during these sessions that Nikki Sixx brought in Kickstart My Heart. Even though it was a piece inspired by the biggest turning point of his life, Sixx never actually thought much of the song, figuring it shared much more in common with their early work than this new version of the band. He told Rolling Stone, "I thought it was just a throwaway, something that would belong on Too Fast for Love. It just really took a life of its own and fit on the album a lot better than it should." While the overdose and near-death experience clearly informed the chorus of Kickstart My Heart, most of the song is not a harrowing tale of addiction and recovery, nor is it a contemplative piece about the fragility of the human condition. Instead, it's everything Motley Crue does best, a mindless balls-to-the-wall ode to the thrills that make life worth living. In the final verse of Kickstart My Heart, Sixx gives a simple summation of the band's biography, and makes the assertion that there is no thrill in life greater than the thrill that he and his bandmates get from playing music, and from embodying that rock and roll spirit.
When we started this band, I was needed was a laugh. Years gone by, I say we've kicked some ass. When I make rage, you hear the stage, drilling runs through my veins, and I say we're still kicking ass. Say, kickstart my heart, hope it never stops, and I think we did all of this too much.
When Motley Crue released Dr. Feelgood at the end of August 1989, it was met with immediate acclaim. It became the group's first #1 album and gave them some of the most celebrated hits of their career, including Kickstart My Heart. More than any of that, it proved that Motley Crue could live a clean life and still make the rebellious music they'd been known for. Dr. Feelgood literally brought Crue from death's doorstep and threw them back into the spotlight, spawning one of the most successful tours in their history. But in its wake, the tensions that had grown over the years started to show. Lead singer Vince Neil parted ways with the band, and they were thrown into a tumultuous era as alternative rock rose and the world moved past glam metal. For his part, Nikki Sixx continued his addiction recovery, relapsing briefly before declaring himself sober in 2001. He's remained sober for over 23 years now, but still manages to find the thrills in life and the joy in music that he celebrates in Kickstart My Heart. Oh, and that Manitoba man? Turns out the excuse didn't work. He was fined $639, but the cop who gave the fine believed the excuse because he himself was also listening to Kickstart My Heart.